It's finally time to take a look at one of the more novel and unique World of Tanks console tanks at tier 10, of course being the udes 1516, the Swedish tier 10 medium tank. And today we've got two great gameplays to be showcasing in today's video, and of course on screen right now this is the tank. It looks very, very interesting. It's one of those that certainly is more as we say, unique and has some key kind of attributes. Of course, that very well sloped turret, as with all of the Swedish tanks. You know, you're looking at the mediums, also the tank destroyers, and then of course you have the Emils and the Kranvang, which all have that really well sloped turret armor. And this is exactly the same. It has nigh impenetrable frontal turret armor. If you're using your gun depression, of course, yes, you can still be penned in your in the front of the turret if people are looking above you, because the whole point of the turret is that the angle makes the rounds bounce. However, with this tank, you also have a pack-a-punch, and we'll look at the statistics in the garage and then showcase that gameplay in just a second. So here in the garage, of course, we are taking a look at the statistics, and I guess we could do a little comparison between some similar sort of tanks and why this tank is so unique, and that is mainly down to the whole alpha damage of the tank. Now, it's not completely unique because you have things like the Object 430U on the Soviet tech tree, which you'll be able to have a look at as well, which also has for that 440 off the top of my head, at least I believe it does. Yes, there we go. So yes, it does have one of the more unique alpha damages of all of the tier 10 medium tanks. Of course, not quite comparable to the Hesh rounds of the FV4202 in terms of the amount of damage that they can deal, but this of course is more consistent, and that is what you're all about with a tier 10 medium tank, and that is what the udes 1516 can offer you. Now, not only does this tank have uniqueness in the alpha damage and the turret armor, it also has probably one of the weirdest mechanics within World of Tanks, and that is the siege mode mechanic, whereby basically when you are going slow, you have the ability to turn your turret, and you've got this hydro-pneumatic suspension which allows your tank to basically raise and lower, as with all of the Swedish tier 10 TDs as well. So you've got the udes TDs, they all have the same sort of system whereby you can make your the angle of basically your tank raise up and down depending on what you're shooting, which makes it very, very, very good at fighting on ridge lines, and that is what the udes 1516 basically relies on. It says it has a maximum depression of 13 degrees, which, don't get me wrong, that's absolutely amazing. I don't know if that factors in the siege mode mechanic or whether that's just the actual value of the gun depression, but basically with the siege mode, that will either increase it or basically make it very, very useful, because although it may have 13 degrees of gun depression, I'm not entirely sure how they work out the gun depression, whether that's the value that you can lower your gun by, and then of course you can raise the back of your tank up with the hydro-pneumatic suspension, which allows you to get even more gun depression. So I don't quite know whether it works like that or whether it's just what the total, but essentially the 13 degrees of gun depression will make this tank amazing because of the low profile nature of the tank, because of the low profile nature of the turret. It means that essentially when you're poking over a ridgeline, all they can see is pretty much your gun, if that is what you're poking over the ridgeline. Obviously, if you go fully over the ridge and you're showcasing your hull, completely negates what we're talking about. But for the purpose of this video, if you are just showcasing your turret armor, you can see that the turret is very, very well angled, like we talked about, but it also has 100mm of frontal turret armor, which when angled like this becomes nigh impenetrable. And because it is 100mm of armor, it means that it cannot be overmatched by a lot of the tanks that you'll be facing, because of course overmatch is a thing within World of Tanks that can really ruin your day, especially when you're playing the lower tiers, when a lot of people have a 155mm cannons and you may only have 30mm of side armor. However, this does not get overmatched in the turret, at least not reliably unless they hit some of the more kind of unlucky areas like the cupola, but even then they'll probably pen that anyway regardless. But essentially that is exactly what you want to be doing, using the turret armor like we talked about, and the hitting and slapping people for 440 alpha damage. It also has a very nice top speed limit, which means that you can get up to 50 kilometers an hour forward, which certainly means it's no sluggish medium tank. And with the armor model, that's kind of the trade-off. I guess you get slightly slower than some of the mediums at tier 10, but you do get that armor model that a lot of them don't 100% have. And you can see even with the upper hull armor, it's very well angled, and even the hull itself is very well angled. So all of it combined mean this tank can actually be pretty bouncy. And certainly if you want to side scrape in this thing with the tracks and the side skirt that the tank gets, which is probably easier to see on the loadout version, you can see that they have big side skirts which are basically heat absorbers, which you will be pleasantly surprised to know. So that is basically the tank and its statistics and what makes it unique. As far as equipment, if you are to purchase and go for this tank, basically I've run a more unique setup whereby we're kind of going holistically gun stabilizer, because you want the best accuracy since the tank isn't particularly accurate, standard anyway. And then we went with loader and advanced optics, basically boosting that DPM to make it more in line with the other tier 10 mediums, and the advanced optics to boost that view range to make it yet again more in line with a lot of the other mediums, because it doesn't have particularly the best view range of all of the tier 10 mediums. As I'm sure if you've watched the other two videos on the Object 140 and the FV4202 recently, you'll notice that this has nearly 100 meters less vision range than those tanks. As far as moving on with this video, of course, we are going to check out some really good gameplay in this tank and showcase why this tank is something that you might enjoy and whether you should actually pick it up over some of the other tanks within the game. So first gameplay is here on Fisherman's Bay, and this is probably one of the better maps for the UDES 1516, and that is because you can use your gun depression very nicely on this map, especially if you get yourself on this mid-ridge in the central of the map, and then you use that to kind of at least try and use your view range, because as we talked about, it doesn't particularly have the highest view range, but yeah, certainly taking that into account, you can spot a lot of the heavies that cross into the town should they actually cross into the town. You see this object for 752 over there. This is exactly the position that we're trying to get into to be able to deal the damage to those crossers if they do manage to go over there. You see we spot one of them, and the object 752 here is just about to get slaps. 460 alpha damage down to him, and this is where the tank is so nice, is when you can slap people for so much alpha damage as you see we are doing. Of course, hitting him again there. We probably low rolled a little bit on that round, but we still overall high roll between the two rounds that we've just fired. Really nice, but we're definitely looking to try and get some more crossing damage as on people that are moving across, which is something that you'll want to do in the UDES. I don't know if we use, as you can see right there, we were about to use the siege mode mechanic. Did you see how it actually raised below the minimum gun depression that we actually had? I don't know if you could manage to see that, but essentially what happens is the top of the turret, or the back of the tank, actually moves up, or that it moves down dependent on where you're looking with the tank. And so yeah, you can get a better and more effective damage within the game. You can see we're taking out that WZ, little snap onto him, very nice indeed. Get him out of the game, because that can be a real pain when you've got light tanks trying to spot that mid-ridge where we are right now. Definitely is a bit of a pain. Of course, Jaeger over there, don't want to be getting hit by him, because he is probably one of the very few tanks within the game that could pen the turret of this thing, especially if he's loading heat rounds, which are, once again, the bane of this tank's existence. Somehow, we managed to bounce off the side of the FV215B. Don't quite know how that managed to happen, but we will slap him with another round. And so we're up to 1500 damage already, which is very nice considering we fired like 3 shots. Make that 4, and we're up to 2000 damage as well. Yes, we did manage to take the final shot on that WZ, which boosted that up a little bit. We went for a little blind fire there, and that's something you can utilize yourself if you're in the game. Don't get me wrong, don't go shooting at absolutely nothing. But if you just hit someone somewhere and you're about to reload again and they go undetected, 9 times out of 10 they'll still be in that approximate region, so you're more than likely going to be able to get another round into them. Bit unfortunate there with the shot on the FV215B, considering the IS-7 comes out ass on to us, which is a little bit of a pain, but there we go, we managed to track him down, which actually led to more assistance damage, 1700 assistance in fact, which is very nice, which is something also that you can utilize in the game. Of course, if you can aim for the tracks and pen, that is of course the best thing you can possibly do in terms of hitting an opponent, which is always very, very good if you can manage to do that. Obviously you can't every single time, and often you might just want to go for the damage itself rather than just trying to go for the tracks, especially if you haven't got teammates surrounding you. But when you do have teammates surrounding you, that is exactly what you want to be doing. And you can see in this game 5,500 damage combined basically within, 4 minutes of the game starting, which isn't bad, don't get me wrong, it's nothing absolutely amazing, but it certainly showcases what the tank can do. It has it's opportunistic, and you can certainly use it in some scenarios to basically have these sorts of games so quickly. And if you do position yourself right and you're using the gun depression of the tank, a lot of the time you can actually hold off many heavy tanks actually, and that's where I guess the tank is somewhat of a hybrid. As much as I don't want to call it a heavy tank, it really isn't a heavy tank, but if you do put it in a situation where you can get hold down, it becomes nigh impenetrable. So I guess it's like a heavy on a ridge line, similar to the Krambong. If you can get it on a ridge line, it becomes basically unpennable, and it can be super good, but if you are caught out in the open, it basically nullifies all of the armor, because the hull armor is not particularly very good, and so you're more than likely going to get penned by that. So take that into account if you are looking forward to getting this tank. It isn't completely invulnerable and an overpowered, heavily armoured medium tank, but if you do get yourself into a position like we are in here, you can bounce some rounds. As you just see the Griller bounce off of us, we're going to go for the arty. You know how I am, love getting the arty out the game. But what we're going to do now is essentially try and ram the Griller, but we absolutely fluff it and miss it completely. And then we go side on to the Griller, which is always a good idea, considering, you know, great strategy. But the Griller doesn't actually even go for us, he's aiming somewhere else off in the distance somewhere. But yeah, we do manage to pick up the final damaging hit on him and the final kill of the game to pick up the win and victory. So 4,500 damage later, 2,262 assistance with 1,050 blocked. And not only that, given that it's ×2 silver this week on World of Tanks, 157,000 silver for a tier 10 game, which is amazing. A good one at that, but yeah, all the same, a lot of silver. Now we'll move into the second gameplay of today and showcase a little bit more about the tank. So this might not be your average run-of-the-mill medium tank, but it certainly can perform in the same ways. And this Pilsen game pretty much tells you everything that you need to know about this tank, and whether the armour model, like we talked about, can actually hold up against some of the heavy tanks, and that is exactly what this replay is trying to showcase. And I think that that is something a lot of people kind of don't do within World of Tanks. They don't realise that actually sometimes you can face off against your kind of arch nemesis classes that are in the game. Things like, you know, light tanks don't particularly do well against medium tanks. They tend to do better against heavies. And then you've got things like medium tanks don't tend to fare very well against a lot of the heavily armoured heavies. But in some cases and some scenarios, you still can outperform the kind of opposing class, and that's exactly what we're kind of looking at trying to showcase with this one, albeit not necessarily the traditional medium tank, but more of a novel one. So of course we have got into a position on a hill where you want to be taking the udes if the opportunity arises. Not all of the time, but sometimes. You can see at the beginning of this game it's not particularly very interesting. We haven't managed to find very many people that have crossed over, which is of course where you can get early damage on Pilsen. A lot of people will cross over to this side of the map, down where our other heavy tank is in the bottom left hand corner over there of the screen. But no one's managed to actually come over here, and so what we're going to do is try and get into a position where we can deal some damage, at least to someone, because at the moment we haven't actually got anyone to shoot at. Now we do go for the machine's lower plate here, which doesn't work out very well, of course, being the 50B hull. Yeah, it was more than likely going to bounce, but we just wanted to get a shot off anyway, nonetheless. But from this point onwards, this is where it gets really interesting, and this is where we decide, you know what, I'm going aggressive. I'm sick of sitting back at the back of the map in the udes 16. It's time to actually move forward and try and make an impact on the left-hand flank, so we don't, so we can basically effectively combine our forces in multiple directions against the opponents of the enemy team. Now, we do have some support in the Object 268 over there. I think it's a version 5, so if we do get rushed, at least he'll be able to punish them. Well, fingers crossed. Now what we've done here is get into a position where we can hopefully get a few shots on these two heavy tanks, being the machine, and I believe it's a Kranvang or a Emil. No, it is the Kranvang. You can see we put a round into the side of the hull there of the Kranvang. The Object 268 decides to go a little bit too aggressive for my liking. He loses quite a bit of hit points in just a second, you see. Obviously pushing up with a pretty lightly armoured hull armour tank is not a good idea, but unfortunately for us we do manage to bounce off of the Emil, which is a little bit annoying, considering we were trying to help him out and get rid of him out of the game, because that is definitely not a tank you want to leave alive. Is an auto-loading, super heavily armoured turret armour tank. When we're trying to actually go hold down and use our turret, yeah, it can be a little bit of a problem. Now the machine, obviously the priority target to turn our armour towards, because that has an autoloader, and if he manages to fire at us multiple times, it's not going to go very well. We do not manage to actually pen him there, which is really annoying, and now it's time to help out this Scourge, because the machine is more than likely going to be reloading. If not, he's probably only got one shot in the clip, and so the E5 becomes now the priority target, and to help out our teammate in the IS-3, which of course we try to do. 508 damage roll there, meaning that we do manage to have a nice roll against him. We do need to make sure that this shot counts, and we do, and take him straight out of the game. The machine then is coming aggressively towards us, and as you'll notice that we've actually only taken one shot's worth of damage within this game, which is very... It's not usual when you're playing in a medium tank. That's more of a heavy tank sort of playstyle, but you can see the machine is just bouncing rounds continuously off of us, except that one where he's managed to push us side on. And not going to happen in most tanks that you play, but given that the machine is now reloading, we're going to just be super aggressive against him, because what's he going to do? Absolutely nothing, because he is completely out, and that is where the autoloaders can be very painful, is when someone realises you're completely out and they can just follow you around like we were doing to the machine. Now 4,000 damage later, very nice play in the middle of the map. Definitely securing this area pretty much helped win the game. I'm not going to say that it was only me within this game, because there are 14 other people that had an impact, but definitely us pushing forward here meant that there was significantly less opposition for our team to wipe up on the right hand side of the map in the town. That being said, there is a little bit of damage left to have, not necessarily very much, but we do have the Jaeger over here. We also have an FE3805. Granted, the Jaeger has just fired, so we're kind of counting down in our heads how many seconds until he's going to be fully reloaded. It's definitely not yet, and we're just going to go around quite easily and put a round, waiting until we get round to the side of him to put that round in. And then of course we have the FV3805 on the move straight into him, 450 damage back our way, and 4,651 damage total. Not necessarily the highest damage game you'll ever see in the udes 15-16, but a decent game nonetheless, and certainly showcased, you know, the armor model, which is kind of what I go for with these clips. It's not necessarily, you know, me doing 7,000 damage where we're sitting at the back camping for the whole game and managed to somehow just get that damage because the opponents were just walking towards us. That was a bit more of an aggressive game, and hopefully you enjoyed that kind of gameplay style. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with these videos. We did manage to come third on the team, which is Quite surprising considering we did have a pretty meaty game, but there we go. Other than that, I hope you do enjoy these videos, and if you want any specific tanks reviewed, then leave that in the comment section down below. And did you actually think this tank is quite good? Have you played it? Are you going to go towards it now that I've done a video on it? Or are you going to completely avoid it and go, no, that doesn't look like it for me? Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.